Just off U.S. Highway 231 in Troy, if you follow the smoke from its chimney, you'll find Hook's Barbecue. This local favorite has found its way into the Alabama Tourism Department's book, Alabama Barbecue, Delicious Road Trips. And its loyal customers know why.
I got some North Alabama roots, and I've always enjoyed barbecue North Alabama, and this reminds me of that barbecue as well.
I like the sauce on it. It's just a great tender meat, and I love it.
On a typical day, folks line up to chow down with barbecue done the old-fashioned way.
Primitive caveman.
So what you're seeing is anything that's not shot in front of a window, you can make out the details pretty good. But as soon as they move something, move the camera to include both indoors and outdoors, then you're going to run into a little bit of a problem.
A lot of barbecue places may use hickory, mesquite, but we use oak exclusively. We think that's the best flavor, the best smoke.
And whether it's the pork being sliced and diced, that tender chicken, or the ribs cooked just right, you can't go wrong.
It is an art. I mean, it's like a musician's instrument. You get the fire and canvas of a painter. I mean, that's what we work with.
You know, the great thing about barbecue is you don't always have to eat it inside the restaurant.
So in this case, he's now gone outside, and I don't know if you noticed, but he's actually has a tree above his head, so he's underneath the shade of a tree. So because he's underneath that shady tree where the camera's trying to focus, that's a dark area. Behind him where the lake and the water is, that's going to be a much brighter area. So as the camera's trying to concentrate between one or the other, the contrast ratio is going to become different. So as you kind of see here, the iris has had to open up to adjust for him, but it's also made the background so bright that it's hard to see. And so this is one of the reasons why you have to be careful when you're dealing with a contrast ratio of indoor of your camera, that if you're shooting indoors or outdoors, be wary of where your lighting is and what it looks like. And that looks really, really good. So that's one of the reasons why you want to be careful when you're shooting something both indoors and outdoors, and you don't want to shoot in front of a window. Now this also comes to play, like I said a moment ago, when he was underneath that tree and he had coverage over him. So if you're trying to shoot an event like this one, where an event was shot underneath a tent, everybody inside the tent is under a different lighting scheme than what's going on outside of them. So it's much similar to shooting in a window. So if I try to iris up to get a better detail of the people under the tent, then the brightness outside is going to get even worse, and it's going to become harder to see them. So this was shot on a still camera, and they have a contrast ratio pretty well. One of the things that they're shooting is not so much the sky, but you can see some basic clouds, not a whole lot light coming in. You're getting a little bit of overexposure in this image. Likewise, with this large window looking outside, again, it's starting to get overexposed because they're trying to find a balance of both indoors and outdoors. And so if you ever try to shoot something that is in front of a window, you're going to wind up either getting a really bright background, or your subject is going to be so dark that your footage is probably going to be not usable. So here's a question for you. When is using this extreme contrast ratio a good thing? Where you have a necessity where you may try to adjust between something really bright and something really dark. Well, a good example of that could be if you have an interview where you need to conceal the person's identity. You can use contrast ratio in this particular case. So what they wound up shooting was the person in front of a bright window. Inside where they are, they've turned off all the lights, and they've adjusted the contrast ratio so that it's hard to see who this person is. And so this is a really good, quick way to shoot something and conceal someone's identity. Now, another way that has been done in the past is to kind of blur their face so you can't see that. But you have to be careful with that. In this case, they were interviewing a lady about some story, and they blurred her face so that people couldn't tell who she was. And then they interviewed her boss, and they blurred his face. But in the editing, they forgot to get her sitting in the background. So now we know exactly what she looks like and possibly who she is. So trying to conceal her identity did not work well in this case. Using a contrast ratio probably would have worked a lot better. Now, contrast ratio is a difference between light and dark. Now, one other thing we're going to look at what's called color temperature, and that different light sources have different intensities and different colors. So like red, green, yellow have different colors and different intensities. And these are measured on a scale known as Kelvin. So when we're looking at bright sunlight, we're looking at what's known as about 56K or 5,600 Kelvin. And this is more intense when we get overcast, like cloudy. So even though it's not quite as bright, we're still getting a higher color temperature of now we're moving into 65K. But bright sunlights creates shadows, and these can be very hard shadows. So if you ever look at your shadow and you see an exact outline of your hand, then we're looking at what's called a hard shadow. If you look at your shadow and it's very soft, you can't quite make out the details, then that's what's known as a diffused light or a soft light. And sunlight is not always a good background. So don't shoot indoors with a window in the background because the sun can cause an issue like I just showed you before. Now, when we talked about colors, and we talked about a temperature scale known as Kelvin, and this came about from the 1800s British physicist William Kelvin. And basically what had happened was he had a black block of coal and he started heating it up. And he noticed that after a while it went from black to red. And then as it got hotter, the coal changed color to yellow. And then as it got even hotter, it went back to blue. And then it moved on to white when it was reaching its highest temperature. And then he'd bring it back down a little bit. And he noticed that it went white, back to blue, back to yellow, back to red. And so he turned the temperature back up and it went again, red, yellow, blue, white. And so one of the things he noticed was that there was a direct correlation between how hot the coal got and the color of the temperature. Or the color of the coal. So he was able to accurately set a temperature for a certain degree and he could get it red. Change the temperature to something else and he could get like a bright blue. And so he created a scale based on these temperatures, and this was known as the Kelvin scale. And his scale starts at absolute zero, which is a temperature that cannot get any colder. And then this is about negative 273 degrees centigrade as absolute zero. And then the other end of the spectrum goes into the hundreds of thousands of degrees in temperature. And so these temperatures can coalesce to the same color. And in many ways, the temperatures can also coalesce into things that you see in astronomy, like a red sun, a yellow sun, a white dwarf star. They're going to have a similar color temperature because of that color wavelength they're putting out. So when we're looking at color temperatures in the world of television studios, there is a wide range that can go from about 3,000 to about 27,000. But we usually deal with two main color temperatures. One is going to be 32K, and that's going to be sort of this yellowish tan of a light. And this is a light that a lot of people see in their homes. It's sort of a soft yellowish orange. It's kind of close to what you might see for like a candle. On a brighter spectrum is what's called 56K. And this is where we start getting into kind of bluish and whites. And you'll see this come a lot from fluorescent lights. A lot of office lights will have this as well. And some people say, you know, this is going to be closer to daylight. So if you're looking at purchasing a light bulb, look at the side and see if it's being called like a warm white or a cold or a daylight. And you can definitely see a difference between that orangish yellow and that bright bluish white. So 32K and 56K are the two main ranges we're going to be dealing with in television lighting. And so that's going to be a look at what we deal with when we're talking about different types of lighting and how they adjust with according cameras. So you've got to remember that there's a contrast ratio between the light and dark, and there's also going to be a wide range of colors that are going to come in the Kelvin scale. And each color kind of has its own assignment. And so by knowing this information, you're able to adjust the lighting in your studio to make it more comfortable for the people that you have. And as I look at the studio behind me, I can see that the lights have a little more of a yellowish tint to them. So that's going to tell me that these lights are moving